Hi, folks, and thank you so much for joining us for our panel about LGBTQ stories in sci-fi, presented by the Boston Sci-Fi Film Fest, which is going on now through tomorrow. You can get tickets for it at bostonsci-fi.com. My name's Caro Murphy. I am the executive director of Boston Fig, and I will be your host this lovely afternoon. And I am joined by our illustrious guests. Bears Rebecca Fonte, and she's the founder and artistic director of the Other Worlds Sci-Fi Film Festival, and Shawn Cotter, who is the executive director of Wicked Queer, which is Boston's LGBTQ plus film festival. So, hello, hi, Bears, hi, Rebecca. Bears, Rebecca, hi, Bears, hi, Shawn. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm just going to dive right in. So I think one of the first questions that we wanted to ask was just very generally, is science fiction a big tent? Can we bring who we are into that environment, both in terms of like the media that's being produced as well as the community that surrounds sci-fi?
It's a tough one. I mean, it's like, can we or are we? I mean, I think it's a very big difference because, I think that certainly that there have been movies that have good LGBTQ representation. There have been a lot better television shows that have good LGBTQ representation, but it's not much. And also there's been some pretty bad ones too. So can we do more? Yeah.
Absolutely. Shawn, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We can and we should, but we're not. It was very interesting trying to sort of prepare for this sort of panel discussion because I was trying to look at least, going down all the letters of the alphabet and thinking about science fiction. And, TV does definitely do it better, but film directors, you need to come clean. Come on, do it. We want it.
Yeah, what do you think about in terms of the community? Because in terms like we had a little bit of kind of a preparatory discussion before this, and we were trying to call out like media and creators, and we were able to find some. But I'm really curious about your perspectives, especially from running film festivals. What is what does it feel like in the community? What are those experiences of moving around the sci-fi community as queer creators and people who are running film fests?
Well, so when I started my festival 7 years ago, I was not out of the closet. And I definitely thought about it for a while before I came out because I wasn't 100% sure what it was going to be like in the community. As somebody who's, not only queer, but trans. I mean, I guess we're rarer than rare. I mean, I was a little bit inspired by the Wachowskis, I would have to say. I made my films. They were always female-centric, all of my films. And part of making my films led to my acknowledgement of my own identity. So I felt like I continued to make the same films as a filmmaker. And so I was like, well, my identity as a film director has always been that of a filmmaker. So my first film that I made after I came out was actually a horror film, not a sci-fi film. But I went to a lot of the same festivals. And it was very interesting to see how people interacted with me, if it was different, and also getting to go to LGBTQ film festivals with a genre piece was also really interesting.
Yeah, Shawn, what's your take from the, like, you're running a queer film festival explicitly, so that's probably a very different.
Yeah, it's a little. I mean, it's a little bit of a different animal, but at the same time, I crave genre films. Like, to be honest, like I want to see like sci-fi, I want to see horror, and it's too far in between. Like, there's always a lot of shorts. Short film sort of submissions that we get that are science fiction, but never any features, and it's sort of a rare bird. And I love science fiction myself, and also love horror, and a lot of I want more queer filmmakers to make genre films, because I feel like stop chasing Hollywood, stop making independent genre films. Like, honestly, I can't get through that enough, because you're only creating more worlds, and you're also bringing more people into those worlds. and I think that's super important.
I love that. That's a natural segue to my next question, which is, do you feel like it's harder to introduce queer characters into these existing worlds, into franchises that are already established, or to create totally new ones that have queer characters like that are featured or that are central to the narrative?
I mean, I think that all you need to do is look at Star Trek, and just for a perfect example, because it took years. There've been so many Star Trek shows, and it took years for them to have a queer character that was acknowledged as queer. And they had several false starts. There was a script that was written that was essentially about the AIDS crisis during Next Generation. There are the Trill, which is definitely have been a metaphor for transgender identity. They certainly are now, but at the time, I think you could read that even if they weren't aware of it. It took years for them to have a gay character. It was the first season of Star Trek Discovery where we finally got one. Despite the fact that fanzines, had been writing, fan films had been made with gay Star Trek characters. One of the very first fan films involves, and some of the first fan fiction involves Spock and Kirk as gay characters.
Wow, I did not know that. That's incredible.
It's so true.
Some of the earliest fan fiction is Star Trek fan fiction.
I ship that so hard. Like, perfect.
Yeah, if you know fan fiction, it invariably becomes gay fan fiction, and so yes, yeah.
Because I feel like it becomes gay fan fiction often because we crave to see ourselves represented in science fiction, and I feel like, I'm sorry, but science fiction franchises, stop being freaking lazy. Because I feel like it's very lazy, because there's something like Orphan Black, which from the get-go, like from the beginning, had a queer character and also had queer storylines that were positive. Mm-hmm. and it was seamless and easy. Like, I personally don't understand why, besides it's sheer laziness and lack of queer creatives in the sort of rooms that need to advocate for proper representation.
I mean, let's face it, there were probably queer creatives in the room, but they weren't out, and they were afraid to come out by virtue of storylines they were proposing. Because, just to go back to Star Trek, I'm going to keep coming back to Star Trek because I think it's a really good example of what you can and what is possible with queer identity in science fiction. Because, from the various earliest days of Star Trek, they said, well, this is an advanced version of our world, so obviously there's no racial issues anymore. We have Black women in important command positions. We have a Russian on board, and this was at the height of the Cold War. They couldn't find a way to have a gay character, so apparently even though it was 400 years in the future, we didn't have gay characters. And you saw that in characters on Deep Space Nine with maybe had some sort of identity. There's the tailor, the undercover tailor, who's a Cardassian. He is clearly a gay character.
Oh yeah, he's so queer coded.
Right. He never comes out. Mm-hmm. It's like, why not? Why not just do it? Why was that so troublesome? When the show was on. So it just was somebody unafraid. It was somebody who was too afraid to do it.
Well, it also kind of reflects where the show was at that time in society. I mean, we didn't LGBT folks did not get the right to marry or to keep jobs until, I mean, what was that, 2016 or something? 2013 was the right for marriage legalized. And I mean, I still feel like television is still very behind of the culture sort of representation too, even though it's a lot better than the film world. But I just feel like in 2021, it's like it's time to it's really time to make those changes, and we see a lot of that sort of happening on the kind of ground level with sort of racial sort of representation too. But I feel like let's bring it all forward.
Yeah, I feel like intersectionality is such an important part of the creative process for where we need to go with media, that we need all these things mixed up together. We need to see queer stories. We need to see Black stories. We need to see stories that are just not the mainstream narrative, not the dominant narrative. So I have like kind of two different directions I can go here. One is like asking about aliens in sci-fi as like, a queer stand-in. The other is just kind of going into the industry. So what would you prefer? Do you want to talk about aliens or you want to talk about the industry?
Let's talk about aliens.
Okay, great. So what is your opinion on like the use of aliens to establish that queer coded kind of narrative versus having it just be a queer human?
I think it's easy. I mean, why not make it? I feel like if it's an easy in, why not take it? And I feel like aliens are always perceived as the other. And I feel like as a queer person, I am always othered. I've never been, even with sort of representation and in rights and stuff like that, I'm always the other.
I feel that right in my heart.
I don't feel like a comfortable box that someone could put me in. I mean, people can perceive boxes that I'm in, but I feel like the identity that I am as a queer is not an easy. I don't fit. I've never felt like I fit anywhere. So for me, aliens, mutants, things like that always were sort of like characters that I sort of related to. In many ways, I was a huge fan of like the X-Men and stuff like that when I was growing up, because I equated to Homo superior, to be honest.
Bears, what about you?
I think that's interesting because I don't like that. I don't want to be othered. I don't want to only find my existence in something that is very far off from from everybody else. But I guess for me, I found my identity usually in the female characters. Like, so I was watching Battle Beyond the Stars, and I was watching Sybil Danning, as this badass warrior, and I was watching the original Flash Gordon, and I was really, I was all into Ornella Muti and Princess Aurelia. I was all about that. That was where I saw myself. So but I think it's it's dangerous because they do the same thing with racial identity too. I mean, Michael Dorn has talked a lot about well, why are all Klingons black? And have we noticed that Klingons originally they were Asian and now they're black, and or they're now it's Asian culture with black actors, and that way we can other people in many othering ways. And they're always, for years they were the bad guys. And I guess, now on Next Gen, they're going to be the good guys. So I guess it's okay to other them. It's the same thing. So it's problematic for me. Like I want to see I love a queer character that just happens to be queer and is just in the storyline, like I love Sense8. You've got 8 characters. They have various powers and they're connected to each other. Some of them are queer. Some of them are not. It doesn't matter. Their queerness plays into the storyline, but they're not getting their identity from their queerness. But that's what happens when you get queer creators making science fiction, because they're in the room at the very beginning developing these characters. I don't know. I don't want to see myself as separate.
That makes so much sense. I feel what you're saying so much. Like like I definitely relate to what both of you were saying of like, I've often had that identifying with the alien character and I'm like, oh yay, it's me. But then like, why do I have to be an alien? Like, why am I weird? Like, maybe I'm not the weird one.
Yeah, because I mean, I've honestly never related to any of the male characters that I've seen in science fiction at all, and I've also often identified with a lot of the stronger female characters. But I don't like. The thing is like I'm also not I'm not an assimilationist. Like I'm, as a queer person, I'm not looking to assimilate. I'm looking to be that sort of thorn in your side, because there's still that work to be done. That thorn kind of like reminds you of, and that's only my identity. I can't speak for everyone else, but I mean, I like, again, if an alien or any kind of queer representation can have that sort of easy in, why not? And then Sense8 is great because it does have that sort of like seamlessness and sort of like and I don't want to use the word universality because that seems to be code right now for tolerable queers. But I also like, I mean, I appreciate that the sort of the work that the Wachowskis are doing, sort of evening the playing ground in many ways with sort of those representations.
Absolutely.
Can I apologize for the fact that I'm being assaulted by my kittens during
Oh,
this
no, not at
panel?
all. They're very welcome.
They're little alien creatures themselves, so
we tend to have one cat represented every festival. So in a film, I'm like, if that film's got a cat in it, booked.
You heard it here first.
A little behind the scenes.
So switching gears into like some of these industry topics. So I kind of crowdsourced to my network, like, what kind of questions would they want to ask about, what limitations you run into. So one of these questions that I really love is, what limitations do you run into as a creator? What kind of systemic issues and censorship make it hard, whether explicitly, like, don't do that, or implicitly, if you do that, you'll be rejected, when it comes to creating film that, contains representation?
Wow. It's interesting because, like, on the one hand, you want the representation as much as possible. On the other hand, do you want it at the risk of having it be poorly represented by somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing? Because that can be worse. I think of Predestination, the Ethan Hawke movie, which depending on how you interpret it, it's either about someone being intersex or somebody being transgender. But I remember watching that originally, going like, "Oh, this is interesting that this is representation." And I think I was a journalist at the time. I was a journalist at the time, and I interviewed the directors, and I was trying to ask them questions about the choices, and it turned out that they really had all the wrong answers. And so I was like, I'm just going to drop these questions because I don't want to turn people away from a movie that they might get something out of simply because I know too much about, like, the fact that they didn't know anything about what they were doing. But yeah, that film can be really triggering if you come into it seeing one side of it versus the other, I guess. So it's a question of, like, we want the representation, but we also, we want to make sure it's being done right, which is why we always say, like, please have somebody queer on your team, or at least that can watch it and give you notes and read it for you. If you are a het cis or a het sissy, as I like to call them, if you're a het sissy writer director, please have someone else read your script and make sure it's queer passable.
Yeah, I would have to agree. With that too. It's a representation is great, but it has to be the right representation. Because honestly, like, there are a lot of, like, things, like, I don't want to see stories about dead trans people. I don't want to see stories about dead lesbians. I don't want to see. I know we all die, but there's got to be other things. And honestly, like, we were chatting earlier about Deadpool. And Deadpool's a really good example of sort of like needing a queer creative in the room, because everyone made a big deal about Deadpool's sort of sexuality is pansexuality. But honestly, anything that was outside of the relationship with Vanessa was the butt of a joke. And that's not cool. I don't take my sexuality as the butt of anybody's joke. And I think that, like, we could do better. And the thing is, there's a way of exploring that sexuality. And I know that Deadpool is supposed to be offensive and unlikable in many ways, but there's a way of doing that humor in a sort of a more way that brings everybody in on the joke, as opposed to having the fingers pointed at people, like, ha,
Absolutely.
Having it be reductive. Yeah.
Yeah, punching up versus punching down, where It's like,
Yeah.
This homophobic joke isn't okay just because that character is pansexual. It's still a homophobic joke. Like,
and I know that Ryan Reynolds means really well with it, because I know that I've listened to an article, like some interviews and stuff like that, talking about Deadpool. So I know that the intention is there, but I feel like it needs to be a little better.
mm-hmm.
Caro, you're a gamer, right?
Yes, I am.
So I think we should talk about Cyberpunk 2077.
You mean like that game that doesn't exist anymore because everyone uninstalled it?
Well, yeah, right. But it's a perfect example of the problematic of exactly what we're talking about. Because when it first came out, everybody talked about how great it was that there was trans representation in it, which is that you could pick a character to play that essentially could look any way you want, and it didn't matter what gender they were. They could be extremely male looking, traditionally male looking, and be labeled as a female. They could, you could change anything you wanted. So basically you could actually play a transgender character, which is pretty great. And then they also said, yeah, and there's transgender representation throughout the whole, world. The problem is all the representation throughout the world was like sex workers. So it was so reductive that basically, oh, okay, so you can be a transgender character, but in this world, the concept of what it means to be transgender is to be a sex worker. So I'm glad that in 55 years or whatever, we haven't actually evolved past the fact that we just think people who are transgender are sex workers.
Absolutely. And the whole concept around like the objectification of trans people is just constant running theme throughout like especially cyberpunk science fiction. I mean, but the objectification of like anyone who is not a cishet male in cyberpunk is hugely problematic. Like, it's my biggest problem with the genre. And like, it could otherwise be a really interesting, fun, cool genre, but like, it's just so gross.
We need more Ursula K. Le Guin.
Yes.
And Olivia Butler.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Well, and I think the cyberpunk. I would bet that there was nobody transgender who worked on that.
Very likely. Yeah, the games industry
from the very, very beginning.
Not the most welcoming place in the world for queer folks and for people who are not cis white men. So yeah, there's problems there. Like, there's problems, I think, like these problems exist in any media format. I think that we're starting to see, some trends away from that. Honestly, especially in the indie space. In the indie spaces is where we're seeing the most, authentic storytelling, the most interesting kind of like new narratives, new dynamics happening. And there are some big production companies that support that kind of work, but it usually starts with someone doing it independently, getting their audience on their own, and then that work then gets picked up by someone who's like, oh, look, there's money to be made here. So, and I imagine it's probably pretty similar in film.
I would totally agree with that. That like all the stories in science fiction, and also like even just in film, regardless of genre, is independent is where it's at. We're not getting these stories from Hollywood. I mean, we're getting Love, Simon, and like, there's a place for that. But I mean, there's other stories but that doesn't represent. That represents a small faction of the community.
Right.
What was really kind of interesting is I just watched a couple weeks ago, Promising Young Woman, and it was so lovely to see Laverne Cox in a role that was just female. She was just a coffee shop owner. And it was like,
she was an owner too, which was really great. She was a coffee shop owner.
So, I mean, it was like so refreshing to see like a Black trans woman that wasn't portrayed as a sex worker or dead or like, or something else. And it's just like, we need to move these sort of representations along. And if anybody really wants some food for thought, I would really highly suggest watching Disclosure, which is on Netflix, which is a great documentary about queer representation in film, and not just
really excellent documentary.
So, yeah, it's just
genius.
I mean, the industry really needs to catch up, and I feel like there's the groundwork is starting to be laid, but it really needs to catch up with the culture across the board.
One of these questions I feel like kind of plays into this perfectly. So So do you think that narratives need to be explicitly showcasing the struggles of our community? Or do you think it's more important to should just merely show that we exist at all? And I feel like we're kind of hitting on the central tension of this, right? Of kind of, are we, like, yes, it's important to show some of, the struggles of the queer community, but also that's not the only narrative that exists in queer spaces.
I don't know. See, that I feel like our representation is speaks to our struggle, because we represent the sort of the struggle of it, and until we are afforded the same sort of rights and privileges as everyone else. I mean, I know now we have laws that help that, and it was refreshing to see the Biden administration come in and sort of sign all these sort of like bills and stuff like that. But until we are truly afforded those same privileges, we are always going to represent a struggle by our presence.
Yeah. I would just answer that duo of choices, Caro, as yes. We need both.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not an easy answer, because I both want to see films that represent our struggle. Like, V for Vendetta is a great example of a film that has the struggle for gay rights as a major part of the plot. But also, I just want to see characters who are queer just living their lives, like in the plot of Star Trek Discovery, where Stamets just happens to be gay, and it plays into his plot because he's married to a guy, and they have fights just like other married people do, and and it's really not part of the story, But I love both of those things. I can't tell you. I'm gonna sound like I'm obsessed with Star Trek, so I apologize. I have gone through the process of, since the pandemic, rewatching every single Star Trek series. So there is a bit of why it's on the tip of my tongue. But I will say that in the new season of Star Trek Discovery, when they had a new character, and Adira said they, and Stamets said what? Adira said, I go by they. I prefer they them pronouns. And I was like, holy fuck. That just happened on my television.
That's
I
amazing.
have never heard that happen before. I mean, and that was, I'm getting chills down my spine just talking about that right now.
Yeah.
It was such a moment, and it's like, I don't know how that plays for everybody else. And frankly, I don't give a fuck how it plays for everyone else. But I know that seeing gay characters on screen for years helped me when I was in the closet, and I know that it helps people who are not gay become allies and understand. So it's all good. I hope that there are people who watch Star Trek Discovery and go, okay, I understand this they thing. I want to get it right. It matters because I saw it on Star Trek.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, now you're kind of switching me over to the Star Trek.
I know. I'm like, I need to go watch Star Trek now.
Now I want to watch it. Damn you!
I literally have considered going back to college to, in film studies, to write a paper about transgender representation in Star Trek. I just want to write that book.
I think you should write it.
Yes.
To be honest, I feel like we need.
Anybody know a publisher?
I can figure that out for you.
Probably got one on the chat somewhere.
No, I feel like there needs to be more. I like this panel a lot because I feel like there needs to be more critical discussion about this. To be honest, and I feel like science fiction. It's like you can build whatever world you want.
Yeah.
Like why wouldn't you want some queers? I mean, come on.
Absolutely. In a world where there's such technology that that people can re-sleeve in Cyberpunk and have whatever external shell they want to hold their body, and then yet we're not exploring queer narratives with that. Like, why? Why?
But I feel like there is that sort of exploration one step below with fans and fans fiction, and sort of because again we're a lot of the sort of like queer fan fiction is sort of comes out of the need for us to see ourselves on the big screen, and I feel like that's something I often tell talk to about with filmmakers is that it is really important, the jobs that you're doing, telling queer stories, because no one else is telling our stories. And I was like, and it's up to us to sort of to make sure that those stories get told, or else they get erased, you know?
Absolutely. So I have another question here that I really like. This is kind of like changing topics a little bit, but so recently we've seen a lot of trends towards there are more queer characters in media. We're telling more queer stories, and there's a lot of just like trends of kind of like queer baiting and queer catching going on. So how does that impact this industry? You know, like what are you as filmmakers and you know, folks who are running film fests? How does that impact the stories that people are trying to tell?
I mean, again, like I feel like Deadpool is such a good example of this, because I felt like a lot of it was a lot of queer baiting, because it was like it was very punchline, and that's not what we necessarily need. I mean, some of it is funny. You know, I laugh at bad gay jokes all the time, but at the same time, I don't want that to be the only flavor. You know, it really needs to be. It needs to be more, and I also want not just to see white gays who are married who live in the suburbs or live in the city either. I mean, a lot of things, it's like, where's the Midwestern queers? Where's the butch lesbian who lives on the polyamorous community in Boise, Idaho? Where are those stories? I'm like, I want that's the stuff I want to see, and the stories that need to be told and also need to be promoted is the stuff that isn't quite as what we've seen before. And I feel like that the more that we promote those kind of narratives, the less sort of like baiting we're going to get. And I mean, it's weird. Like, the biggest movie that people were talking about in the last couple of months, at least as far as like gay male friends of mine, was Supernova, which is Stanley Tucci and I can't even think of the other guy's name is, and they play these characters. But I watched it, and I know a lot of my friends are like, I like Stanley Tucci as an actor. I thought his performance in it was really weak, and I thought the characters had absolutely no chemistry together. And I was like, so here it is, like a huge ally to the community, as Stanley Tucci is. He's played sort of like queerish characters in other things before, kind of getting it wrong with this huge sort of movie about sort of like aging and also gay relationships. So for me, I'm just kind of like, we need more, like I said, we need to promote more queer creatives into those rooms. And I feel like, the comfortability, like, it's time to get uncomfortable as a society and sort of make sure that those stories are getting told.
I don't know if I have anything to add to that. Ow. Sorry. My cat just literally jumped off my leg, sticking his claws into me. Parsec the Space Kitten lifts off. When it comes to queer baiting, it's like, is it wrong that I was like, is it sexy? Is that wrong that's how I look at it? Because like,
I love it.
I want to be entertained, and I want to be titillated, and then I don't want to feel bad about it later. Like, if you rip it off, if you make me think a character is gay and at the end they're not, and then you make me feel bad about thinking that they were gay or something, if you shame me for it, then I wouldn't like that. But I don't know. I mean, there's this argument about like, okay, if I just take a character that I wrote and I just changed that character to be a queer character, is that good? And the answer is no, because that character isn't the same. As soon as you made them a queer character, they have a different identity and they look at the world in a different way. So that's not enough either. You have to do your research. Would you do the same thing for a black character? No. And if you're saying, oh, I don't see color, You
That's
know,
a
like, so
problem in and
yeah,
of
it's the
itself,
same.
yeah.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's the
It's
same. Oh, I
very
don't see
problematic,
queerness.
yeah.
It's the same thing. It's erasure, you know? So you can't just put a character in and say they're queer and make them queer for the sake of being queer. It has to actually mean something. And if it doesn't, then don't do it. But yeah, I mean, get your queer friends to read your scripts. And if you don't have any queer friends, who are you?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Make some.
Get out of your freaking suburb and like go visit some people. I mean, come on. Get out of Kentucky.
Call me.
So this is a total aside that's like completely self-motivated, but are either of you Supernatural fans, and are you familiar with what happened on Supernatural in the last season?
I am familiar with it, yes.
Oh, I'm
that
so
is why
mad
I'm not
about
a
it.
Supernatural fan. Yeah.
I'm so angry about it. Angry about it on every level of my being. But yeah, queer baiting as a trend. I feel like that's like a perfect example. I don't want to like spoil anything for people who may not want spoilers, but I feel like that's a really good example of how queer baiting is when it's done poorly, and when it's like, okay, clearly there were not enough queer creators in the room, if there were queer creators in the room at all when these decisions were made, and the way that characters are interacting and the way that very, very not good. But so okay, this begs the question, like, what is the problem with getting queer creators in the room? Why is this so hard? Why is it so hard because
we're not already in the room,
right?
It's the same thing. That it's like, why is it hard to get female creators in the room? Because they're not in the room. Why is it hard to get black creators in the room? Because they're not in the room. Because the room is full of white men, het sissies.
No,
sometimes Jewish.
Don't use sissies, because I, as a sissy,
it bothers them so much, though, Shawn. That's why.
I know. Like, I mean, there's some gay baiting that I kind of enjoy. I mean, that's the gay.
I'll just say het sisses. Yeah.
I mean, that's white het sisses. Yeah, I want to see people making other people a little uncomfortable by it. And
I do believe you just called for that. Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry about it. I'm going to be unashamedly. That was my problem with Deadpool, is that didn't go enough into that direction. And it could have. Mm-hmm. And it could have been actually very successful in that. And maybe I wouldn't have been quite so bothered by it. But I mean, it's true. I mean, the rooms are filled with white, straight men. And the gay men that are there are not out and looking at the community, because they're in their own little white, rich world, to be honest. And it's funny because, you know, the films that you see, again, promoted by Hollywood that have queer identities are very safe. They're, again, very safe, very story. The stories are often tragic. You know, there's not enough tragedy. You know, someone's got to die, or cancer, or, you know, it's again, it's like the representation is just not right. And we need to call it out. I don't know who's the mailbox we need to write letters to, but I feel like.
Let me give you an example. This is not a genre film, all right? But this is a film that played Sundance like 2 weeks ago and is coming out, major release. It's called The World to Come, and it is a 1860s like pioneer farm wife drama of two women in unhappy marriages who find love. It's actually a really good movie.
It's good.
That said, it's written by two men who are not queer, directed by a woman who is not queer, and the two lead actresses are not queer. On top of it, Casey Affleck, noted sexual predator, is also in the film, and so there's no problem with that either. So these are the films that are getting made, getting into Sundance, and then getting celebrated, getting mass release as being the queer films. Like, here's a queer film, and guess what? It doesn't end happily, as if you thought it might, like this 1850 drama. It does.
Spoiler.
Sorry, I ruined it for you.
That's fine. I saw it, and I completely agree with this. And it's a really good example of the things that are getting promoted and also getting celebrated, like Supernova, like The World to Come. And it's just like, where are our stories in that? And it's like, and you can tell that because it smacks of inauthenticity. Ugh. It's inauthentic, and I can't like hit it home enough that it's like we need to challenge this, and we need to stop accepting these as historical. Stop buying tickets to it, pirate it if you need to. I mean, honestly, not that I'm calling for pirating, because that's a whole nother.
I love that though. I agree.
But I mean, the thing is like, stop giving them your money, queers, and people.
Well, okay. And if you are queer and you're listening to this and you're like, well, what can I do? I would say, okay, well, most of you are probably listening to this because you're filmmakers. A lot of you are, right? So make a movie. Hey, there's another cat. Look at that. Oh, that one actually wants to be on screen.
We are so blessed by cats right
now. So make queer stories and actually make them and have them like be good characters, and don't just I think sometimes as queers, we play it safe because we're like, well, I don't want to put my identity on screen. I just want to be a filmmaker. I don't want to have that be the reason my film doesn't get in, because the reality is that those are the films that stick out. I'll tell you, as a genre fest director, I am desperate for queer material because a good portion of my audience is queer. I mean, that's who comes to these kind of festivals, right? So like, I'm always looking for that intersectionality. I'm always looking for the Black sci-fi. I'm looking for the queer sci-fi. I want that. So if that's who you are, and you can write an authentic story in that voice, please do, because that's the only way you're going to get to the next level and change Hollywood. Is you're going to do it as an independent filmmaker, and then you're going to do it as a feature into indie, and then you're finally going to get a gig, where they want to give you actual money.
I mean, that's I would agree with that too. And as someone who runs a festival who is specifically queer, don't make it a queer best friend movie, because I'm not going to show that. But if you give us a queer character, and please, I am desperate for genre films. I mean, not that I mind a romantic comedy, but I mean, I want sci-fi, I want horror, I would love a suspense thriller, and don't kill them. I mean, people die, yes, but don't kill the queer for at least a decade.
Yeah.
Then we can until the representation kind of catches up, because right now we have more con than we do pro, and it's so hard programming for a queer festival, because I'm not going to show the world that would come. That, like, when I watched it, I was like, I know this is definitely not a film for my festival and for my audience, because I don't want to promote a story like that, because it does have that inauthenticity. And it's just like, it's one of those things that, it's so important to make sure that we're, as people who are kind of pushing and promoting culture, to make sure that the stories are right.
Yeah, and hold people accountable for when they're telling stories that are not theirs to tell.
Yeah, I completely agreed. And I get so many problematic queer films that, like, and it's also sometimes with distribution too. It's like they have a queer character, but it's not the main character, and they're like, well, obviously this LGBT festival will want it, and it's like, no, because it's not a story. That's the best friend story, and that's not the focus of the movie. Now, if the focus of the movie was the gay best friend, then that's a whole different thing.
Absolutely. But like the stereotype of like the marginalized best friend comes in and saves the day with all of their like care and love and
glitter.
And glitter. It's just like, let's just not do that anymore. Like, we're freaking done. So how can people who are not queer get queer people into their writers' rooms, onto their crews, on like making sure that what they're doing, if they're trying to include queer characters, how do they do that?
I would say follow queer writers, follow queer film festivals, follow book clubs, expand your horizon. That's the only way that we're all going to sort of like do that. You want more Black creatives in your follow and support a Black film festival or a film collaborative. I mean, do it. I mean, it's not hard, but you have to do the work. It takes a lot of work to actually make that sort of happen. And I have to say, like, Wicked Queer has been sort of like, and that was one of the things that as I've been programming, I want to be on the right side of history, because I feel like that is important to bring everybody along. And I hear the cries from the community about representation. So it's taken a long time for that to happen, but it's work and it needs to be done. And you need to roll up your sleeve. It's 2021. Roll up your sleeves and just do the damn work.
Yeah. Someday we're going to get to be able to be going to film festivals in person again, and I can tell you the best conversations and collaborators I've met have been in line waiting for films. So, you know, if you want to write a genre film and you want good queer representation, find a genre film playing at a queer film festival and go stand in line and talk to everybody. I'm sure they have similar interests as you. You know, we're not going to bite your head off. You know, I mean, we
won't even pick you up.
We only bite if you ask us to. And usually we like to talk about ourselves. I mean, I know that as somebody who is trans, like when I first came out, I was like, wow, now everybody wants to know what it's like to be trans. And that's that every question I get is about that. And I was like, okay, I have to be an advocate for like my life. But I was like, but it is actually, it's really,
just like,
sorry, you know, it's important to get the right information out there, and I'm glad that I can help do it. And most people do not mind setting you straight and telling you, you know, the right things that you need to know about that. But don't think it's a simple conversation either. Don't think you can have one conversation. Like you've written a script and if you got a trans character and you're like, oh, I just met a trans person. Let me have a 5-minute conversation and I'll be able to solve it. No, you have to, like you said, Shawn, do the work.
I mean, it's so important, you know. It's important for us all to do, like, really kind of do the work. And you know, I'm glad that Boston Sci-Fi has invited me to sort of this panel, because again, it's a room that I don't necessarily feel comfortable in, but I'm glad that I'm here. And you know, now that I'm here,
we ain't going anywhere. I snuck in, Shawn. I've had films play at Boston Sci-Fi since 2011. You know, like incognito. But yeah, we're not going anywhere.
Nope.
Here to stay. Okay, so I want to talk about things that we do like. So I want to talk about some of the moments in sci-fi that have been like expressly like queer, that you can point to as examples of like, this is done well, this is beautiful, this like was an inspiration, people should be looking at this kind of stuff. Like, so yeah, I want to let's go nuts, like talking about all the different things. Like before we did this panel, we had talked about a number of other films, so I guess we can also do some recommendations here too. There's lots of, I mean, obviously Star Trek Discovery. Like,
you got to start with Star Trek Discovery.
Just gonna start there.
And then go back and watch Deep Space Nine and look at Jadzia Dax and the character of the Trill and her life and how they handled that, because she is essentially Star Trek's first transgender character, even though they didn't admit it and maybe didn't even understand it. They still managed to write a pretty great transgender character.
That's awesome.
Ooh, things we like. I really fell in love. I feel like kind of queer formative when I was sort of coming out. Barbarella was kind of like sort of thing, and you know, it not the most amazingly queer positive representation, but I love that queen, that the Black Queen, like with her pretty, so good. And Jane Fonda sort of just being open to all of it. And I also have to say the ice captain was a little bit kind of queer triggering, but that was also kind of like man crush at the same time. But I mean, I think, like, you know, to go like maybe a recommendation, probably not the easiest film to watch, but Liquid Sky was also very like queer formative for me too, because it, you know, it sort of came at a time in the 80s where all around you was just forecasts of death, and destruction. And here was this sort of like world in downtown, the Lower East Side, where you kind of wanted to hang out with aliens and do drugs and do performance art. Like, I just, that sounded super appealing to me as a young queer. So if you haven't seen Liquid Sky, give it a watch. It's got a nice new restoration print is going to be out there.
It's got awesome styling and makeup. Just like the styling is so interesting. But I will say that like the music in that film is very challenging for me.
Yeah, well, it's that sort of performance art kind of music, which is not everyone's cup of tea. But I mean, like for something to watch, like it kind of it hits a lot of buttons. I just watched it about a year ago, and I was like, this kind of holds up, you know?
Yeah.
In many ways. So as a good piece of science fiction. So
I'm going to stay on television and give it up for the CW because I can't believe I never brought this up, but Supergirl has been amazing for queer representation. And get started with Kara Danvers, who's Supergirl. That's her code name, or what do you call it? Her
secret identity? No, her
secret identity. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Kara Danvers. Right. Her sister comes out as lesbian, and that happens in, I think, season 3, and then later. Obviously, you get the character of Nia Nal, aka Dreamer, who is our first transgender superhero, played by Nicole Maines, who's absolutely fantastic in it, and really, really does a good job of having transgender be, they do a good job of having it be a big part of the character, but not all the character is, and it's really good writing. And I know that the writers' room on that show solved their problem by asking her what she would do. First of all, they got a transgender actor, which is like number one, and it's
huge.
It's scary that I should even have to say that, but
I know.
if you're going to have a transgender character, have a transgender actor, because if not, you shouldn't be making the film. But then when they were writing the important episodes, they brought her in very early to the writing process and showed her the scripts and had her consult on it. So that's really great. And so that show, I think, has been one of the best for television for representation. But there's lots. Siren on ABC. Well, it was ABC Family. Family. What is it called now? Freeform. Siren, which is the mermaid that comes out into a polyamorous relationship with a little bisexuality, and it's very, very well done triad that they set up, and I've never seen that on television. So
I also want to, for a television recommendation, Legion is really good too, although brief. Three seasons of awesomeness, and Aubrey Plaza plays a lesbian in it, and it's a weird, I love just the storytelling is absolutely amazing. And yes, I am an X-Men fan, but it's probably one of the best X-Men sort of treatments as well, just as far as storytelling. It's really good. But maybe to go back to film, Brief Story of a Green Planet, which is Santiago Loza is the director's name. Sci-fi with a trans character, and it is one of the most charming road movie films I've ever seen. And it's really great. It's very quiet. It's a very understated film, but it is so powerful. And actual trans representation, and that actress, I forget what her name is absolutely phenomenal in it. So I highly recommend that too. And I just saw Aniara, which has a lesbian couple, and it's a Swedish sort of space movie about a trip to Mars. That the Earth is a hot mess as we are moving towards, and they're evacuating people to Mars, and the trip is supposed to take 3 weeks. But guess what happens? It's not going to take 3 weeks, and they're off course. but there's lesbians, and they, it's a good. It's not an easy movie, and it's not a happy movie, but it's really good as far as representation. Like they actually get it right as far as like inserting queer characters into the sort of the narrative. It's good. It's on Hulu. It's super interesting.
A couple indie sci-fi films that I like, both from 10 years ago, strangely, having their 10th year anniversary. One is Judas Kiss, which is sort of a time loop movie in which a filmmaker goes back to visit his alma mater and give an award that is the award that he won, and he realizes he's been sent to give the award to himself, and then he has to decide whether he's going to fix himself and what that'll do to him. It's sort of low sci-fi, but it's great representation, and everybody who's in it is gay, so and it's pretty hot. It has a porn star in it, so that helps. Who actually turns in a really good performance. And then Codependent Space Lesbian Seeks Sane, which is a super funny indie, super low budget, kind of black and white, done in the style of like old 50s sci-fi films, done by the same writer-director who did the Emily Dickinson movie that had Molly Schaefer in it a couple years ago. So that one I highly recommend. I don't know where you can find that one. Judas Kiss, I just rewatched on Amazon Prime. Codependent Space Lesbian Seeks Same, I'm sure somewhere.
I think it's on Amazon as well, but maybe not Prime. I kind of also want to, like, for throwback kind of things, I want to give props to Poison, which is Todd Haynes. He's the director of Caro and Velvet Goldmine, and Poison is kind of an interesting film because it's a triptych, and one of the stories is science fiction because it has to do with contagion and a pandemic. And it's a super, like, I watched it not too long ago as sort of a list of pandemic films, and it was really, it held up pretty well. It has a little bit of Jean Genet kind of ness in it for one of the stories, but the pandemic story is definitely as an AIDS allegory at the time, and it came out in the early 90s. Really great film. I also want to Wachowskis. V for Vendetta. If you haven't seen it recently, Cloud Atlas as well.
I love Cloud Atlas.
It's a long movie, Cloud Atlas, but it's really good for as far as queerness. Also The Matrix would be.
Apparently, The Matrix is a transgender metaphor. They say. I don't know. That feels a little like. I'll let him have it though. I'll let them have it.
When was the last time you watched it? Bears, when was the last time you watched it?
I have not watched it since I came out, so maybe I should go back and rewatch it.
Because I feel like maybe I wouldn't have had so many problems with Deadpool if I didn't watch it through a queer lens.
Hmm.
And that's
when I told you to watch it, like I feel guilty now because I was like because it was we were brainstorming films and I was like, well, Deadpool, and it's like, yeah, I don't think I've seen it since it came out, but yeah, it is problematic for all the reasons that you said.
And also, again, for one more throwback, we have to give an honorable mention to Rocky Horror Picture Show. I, as a young queer in high school, Rocky Horror, they used to have a midnight screening in Harvard Square, and I have to say that was probably super formative to my coming out. Is actually going and being part of the audience, and then befriending the cast that would do the sort of the live performance. It was great. I wish that they still had screenings of, or maybe when we go back to actually seeing things, if they would do screenings again, because it was fun. And I had big Robert Smith hair in the 80s, and I was constantly picking rice out of it for like days afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's become very mainstream, which is so weird to think about that. But it still holds up as sort of still science fiction and also representative. So, because there's gay characters, there's trans characters, there's a little bit of everything. Bless the 70s for sort of.
I don't think we can deny the sort of effect that Rocky Horror has had just in the background of all of our lives. I mean, it's become part of popular culture. It makes certain things, it makes certain conversations easier to have, although it also makes certain conversations more difficult to have. I am pretty sure that there are many conservatives whose understanding of what it means to be transgender is based on Frankenfurter, which is problematic to say the least. You know, or like based on the birdcage or something. I mean, I don't know. Like that's what conservatives who don't get it think. But that being said, I mean, there's a normalization of queerness in Rocky Horror that I think I'm always going to be thankful for. And the fact that I was exposed to it when I was like 13, I think it really did shape me in a good way.
Yeah, I can relate. Absolutely. Well, we are just about at time, so I want to just make some space for both of you to talk about your plug your stuff and tell people where they can follow you. So, Bears, you want to go first?
Sure. So if you have a science fiction film, be sure to submit it to Other Worlds Film Fest, which is in Austin, Texas, and is in December. And we assume it will be in person. If you have a LGBTQ film that is not genre specific, you can send it to the other festival that I'm the artistic director of, which is AGLIF. But you have apparently one more day to send it to Shawn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you send it to me, quickly, we'll think about it. So Wicked Queer will be happening. If it's a short film, we're actually screening all of our shorts programs throughout the month of April. We're calling it Gaypril Takeover because
Love it.
I'm making room. And I feel like we're going to be online. We're going to be live on Zerv TV. Our actual for our features will be streaming on Zerb TV from April 8th to the 18th. If you want to know more information, follow us on Facebook, Wicked Queer, Instagram @WickedQueer, Twitter, or wickedqueer.org is our website. And we'll get more information. The website's a little bit of a mess right now because we are in production. And we will announce our full schedule about mid-March. So I'm kind of excited. But if you get a sci-fi film or any kind of genre film, send it to me, Shawn @wickedqueer.org, and we'll take a look at it.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
And apparently I'm going to be at this virtual table right after this panel in the virtual lobby that we've got. So you stop by and say hi.
All right. Thank you both so much. And this was such a really just lovely and fun conversation. And huge thanks to Boston Sci-Fi Film Fest for having us. And buy tickets to Boston Sci-Fi Film Fest. You get one more day to watch some amazing films. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Caro. Thank you, Boston.